The sound of clinking glasses echoed like the clash of swords. "How does it feel to be useless?" Evelyn Haley asked, her voice so sweet it hurt. The entire table fell silent for half a second before laughter broke out sharp as a blade, cutting into a mother's heart. The golden light above the table reflected on Evelyn Carter's face, a woman nearing 70. Her silver hair neatly pinned her hands, trembling slightly, but her eyes still deep and bright. She sat at the head of the table, surrounded by candlelight and the scent of roasted beef inside the very house she had once paid for so her son could have a home. But tonight she felt like a stranger in her own family. Haley, her daughter-in-law, wore an expensive dark red dress, her lips curling in a smug smile. "We were talking about people who still have to work after retirement." She continued swirling her wine glass. "But my mother-in-law doesn't have to worry about that since, well, she doesn't really do anything anyway." A few people chuckled softly. Her son Liam said nothing, staring down at his plate. Her grandson Lucas, sitting at the corner of the table, blinked in confusion, unable to understand why the air had suddenly grown so heavy. Evelyn put down her fork, feeling her heartbeat pounding in her chest. Each thud echoed with memories, the sleepless nights, balancing accounts, paying off her son's debts, wiring money to help Haley open her boutique. She had nurtured, worried, carried this family quietly on her shoulders, only to be repaid with mockery at her own birthday dinner. "Haley," she said slowly, her voice hoarse but steady, "it's quite an interesting feeling when this useless woman stops paying your bills." The words dropped like shattered glass. Liam's head snapped up his face, pale. Haley froze, her smile stiffening. The clinking of cutlery stopped. The air in the room thickened, broken only by the ticking clock, marking each heavy second. Evelyn lifted her glass of water and took a slow sip. The water was cold, but her chest burned a quiet fire, awakening after years of endurance. Haley tried to laugh, but her voice trembled. "You're joking, right?" "No," Evelyn replied simply. "I'm not." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. No one dared to stop her. She took her coat from the back of the chair and calmly walked toward the back door. Rain had begun to fall outside, the cold drops brushing her face, but she felt lighter with every step. In that moment, Evelyn realized she had been imprisoned far too long by her own kindness. The light from the house glowed through the glass door, revealing Haley standing still, her lips pressed tight, her eyes burning with anger. Liam placed a hand on his wife's shoulder but said nothing. Little Lucas ran to the doorway and called softly. Grandma Evelyn bent down, touched the boy's head gently, and whispered, "Go back to your father." Her old car pulled away from the bright neighborhood, leaving behind the sound of rain and stunned faces. On the drive home, the dim streets of Portland stretched before her under hazy lights. Each passing lamppost felt like a marker of the years she had given away to others. She thought of the small lakeside house she once dreamed of retiring and reading books and growing lavender, but sold to rescue Haley's boutique. She remembered the night her son cried, promising that if she helped just one last time, everything would be fine. She had believed him. She had signed, transferred money, stayed silent, and it was that silence that made them think she was weak. When she arrived home, Evelyn unlocked the door and turned on the lights. The room was tidy and cold. She hung up her coat and walked straight to her study, a place few had ever entered. Her late husband Robert's photo still sat on the oak desk. He had been gone nearly 10 years, leaving behind a modest inheritance and one reminder: don't let anyone make you believe you're only alive when they need you. She sat down and opened a drawer. Under the yellow lamp, dozens of papers lay neatly stacked: bank statements, tuition bills, loan agreements, and transfer receipts. Each page was a fragment of her life quietly given away. Evelyn turned through them one by one, her hands no longer shaking. One document stood out older than the rest, the investment contract for Haley's boutique signed in 2019. Haley's signature was clearly printed beneath the line that read, 51% ownership transferred upon investment of $60,000. Evelyn pressed her lips together. The daughter-in-law, who thought herself clever, had forgotten that every deal was written in black and white. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Evelyn closed the folder and locked it away. Before turning off the light, she looked out the window where raindrops streaked down like silver threads. What filled her now wasn't pain but a strange calm, the stillness of someone finally awake. That night, Evelyn slept very little. She lay listening to the wind howling outside, and between the silences she heard the steady rhythm of her own breathing. No fear, no regret. A quiet battle had begun, and she knew that this time the winner would be the one everyone in that family had mistaken for weak. The next morning, Portland was covered in a thin layer of fog, pale light slipping through the curtains and painting faint streaks on the wall. Evelyn Carter sat at the dining table, a cup of tea still steaming before her. The soft scent of jasmine reminded her of her old days working in the accounting office, when every morning began with order, precision, and the quiet belief that everything could be balanced if you knew how to calculate it right. Now her life needed to be recalculated too, after so many years of adding up for everyone else and forgetting herself. She opened her old laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet titled Expense Tracker. Each line was a record of how she had saved her son's family from crisis. May 2018, $4,200 transferred to cover the bank debt. December that same year, she paid off Haley's entire store bill. The next year came more tuition for Lucas repairs, for the roof money for Liam's new car so he could look more professional for clients. Each expense was like a stone stacking into a wall around a mother's heart. Evelyn shook her head slightly. In decades of accounting, she had once guarded every cent for her company, but with family, she spent by emotion. Each transfer carried a justification. They just need help this once they're still young. Family must look after each other. But now, those reasons sounded more like chains. The phone vibrated on the table. A message from Liam Mom Haley went a little too far last night. Don't be upset with her. Evelyn read it slowly, her eyes stopping at the word "a little." One word erased every effort of understanding. She didn't reply. Instead, she opened the file cabinet and took out a set of color-coded folders, each color representing a year. Blue for 2018, yellow for 2019, and red, the year Haley expanded her store. She spread them across the table, sitting upright, her eyes sharp again, like the woman who once managed an entire financial system. Among the papers was an old drawing, a sketch of the lakeside cabin she once dreamed of owning. It had been her vision of a peaceful old age, a small white house with a wooden porch overlooking calm water, mornings filled with the sound of birds and rippling waves. She had almost saved enough to buy it until Haley came with her family investment idea. Evelyn remembered that evening clearly when her daughter-in-law sat across from her, eyes shining. "If you invest, my store could become a big brand carrying the Carter name. It'll be your legacy, Mom, something for me and Lucas." She had softened, transferred all her savings into Haley's loft, signed the partnership papers, not knowing that her signature buried her dream cabin forever. Now looking back, she saw herself as someone who had sold her freedom to buy an illusion of family love. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the bitterness still surged inside. In her mind, Haley's voice echoed again that arrogant laugh from the dinner table. Useless. The word repeated itself, cold as steel. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. It was Maggie Lynn, an old friend and former colleague. Maggie had been a legal consultant for many businesses and was now retired. She stepped in, her sharp little eyes glinting behind golden-rimmed glasses. "Evelyn and I heard from Lucas there was some trouble last night." "Are you all right?" Evelyn gave a faint smile. "Better than ever." They sat at the table, and Evelyn told her everything from the humiliation to the years of quiet sacrifice. Maggie stayed silent, nodding slowly, then picked up a paper from the stack. "Haley's Loft a fashion store, right. Do you still have the contract?" Evelyn nodded, handing over the old copy. Maggie skimmed through it, her eyes flickering with surprise. "You know this clause is quite interesting. According to this document, you own 51% of the business if your investment was verified. Have you ever received any profit or dividends?" "Never," Evelyn said quietly. "Then you're still the majority shareholder, Evelyn. You have the right to request an audit, even to suspend operations if you find irregularities." The room fell silent. Evelyn looked at her friend, then at the pile of files. All these years she had believed she'd lost her power, but it had been there all along, buried beneath blind compassion. Maggie placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "People forget that women like us, the ones who used to count every cent, never forget a single number. We just wait for the right moment to bring them back." Evelyn smiled no longer. Sad. "Maybe I forgot how strong I used to be." "No," Maggie replied, "you were just resting between rounds." Outside, the rain had stopped. The faint light softened over the soaked trees. Evelyn stood by the window, watching the last raindrops slide down the glass. She thought of Haley, the young woman who believed she had won, but in the game of money, trust, and dignity, there is never only one player in control. Evelyn turned back to the table, reopened her laptop, and added a new column to her spreadsheet, "Evidence prepared." Each line was no longer an expense, but a brick in her road toward freedom. Maggie stood and put on her coat. "I'll be back in the morning. Keep all the originals safe. And Evelyn, don't stay silent anymore." Evelyn nodded. The door closed softly. The room was filled only with the ticking clock and the cool blue light from the computer screen, reflecting on the face of the woman once called useless. Evelyn whispered to herself, "If they think silence is weakness, they're about to learn what the strength of silence really means." Saturday morning in Portland was cold and damp, as if the whole city were soaking in a veil of mist. Evelyn Carter woke earlier than usual. She brewed a cup of ginger tea and sat at the dining table, gazing through the fogged-up window. Today she would visit the lakeside cabin she had once dreamed of owning. The dream Haley had turned into a so-called family investment. The road to the outskirts stretched through dark rows of pine trees. Evelyn drove her old car, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. When the cabin appeared after a curve, her heart clenched. It was still there, the brown roof, the weathered wooden porch, the small windows overlooking the foggy lake. But she no longer owned it. The cabin now belonged to a stranger, sold after she had emptied her savings to help Haley open her store. Evelyn turned off the engine and sat still, watching the still water reflect the passing birds overhead. "I could have lived here," she thought, reading brewing tea and never hearing anyone call me useless again. A gust of wind blew, scattering dry leaves across the ground. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to let go of regret. What had been lost would be recalculated today. On her way back, she stopped at a small roadside cafe. A wooden sign hung by the door, "Harbor Brew, where new beginnings start." Evelyn smiled faintly and stepped inside. The young waitress greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning, ma'am. What can I get for you?" Evelyn ordered a black coffee. As she stirred in the sugar, she overheard two women at the next table speaking in low voices, just loud enough for her to catch every word. "That boutique owner downtown, Haley Carter, she's looking for more investors again. I heard her store's running out of cash." The other replied, Yeah, word is she's months behind on taxes and supplier payments. Evelyn set the spoon down, her eyes glinting with a cool light. The daughter-in-law, who once looked down on her, was now drowning in the very symbol of power she'd been so proud of. In Evelyn's mind, the numbers began to rearrange themselves into a new shape. When she returned home, Maggie Lynn was already waiting. "I figured you'd go to the lake this morning." Maggie said, her tone gentle but knowing. "I've been reviewing the Haley's Loft contract. There's a detail you missed." Evelyn sat down across from her, tightening her grip on the teacup. "What is it, Clause 23? If the investment recipient fails to repay the capital within 5 years, full ownership is transferred to the investor, which means as of now, you have the legal right to the entire store." Evelyn froze. "The entire store?" Maggie nodded. "I've checked the signing date. Everything qualifies. You don't need to sue. You only have to file a notice of investment inheritance. Legally, you're the owner." For a moment, Evelyn was speechless. Old memories flooded back nights spent balancing ledgers, countless transfers made without a single word of thanks, Haley's condescending stare. All of it condensed into a long, quiet exhale. How ironic, she murmured, "I lost my dream cabin," but somehow ended up owning what she valued most. Maggie looked at her friend, her gaze firm. "Evelyn, don't think of it as revenge. Think of it as balance. You're only reclaiming what was yours all along." That afternoon, Evelyn opened her laptop and logged into the Oregon Business Registry. Line by line, the data for Haley's Loft appeared clearly before her declining revenue, unpaid taxes, unreported assets. She downloaded everything, printed it out, and clipped it into a neat stack. The rhythmic hum of the printer filled the room like the steady drumbeat before a quiet war. On her desk, the old and new documents lay side by side, proof of 20 years of sacrifice and 5 years of silence. Evelyn turned to the last page of the contract and signed the notice of ownership transfer. The pen trembled slightly in her hand, not from fear, but from the rush of newfound freedom rising within her. That evening, Liam called. His voice sounded weary. "Mom, Haley's been a little stressed. I just wanted you to know we're preparing to expand the store, so if you could—" "No," Evelyn interrupted softly but firmly. "I won't be investing anymore." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. "Mom, why the change?" "It's not that I've changed," she said calmly. "I just remembered who I am." After the call, Evelyn sat alone in the living room. The lamp cast a warm glow on the coffee table, illuminating the ownership notice before her. She looked at the words, "Evelyn Carter owner," and smiled. A small smile, but enough to fill the room with quiet warmth. Outside, Portland's night grew colder, but her heart felt calm and steady. She knew Haley would soon realize that the game had shifted. And when that moment came, Evelyn wouldn't need to shout or retaliate. The power of silence had already begun to weave itself through every corner of her life like a dim but unending light. She stood, turned off the lamp, and left the room bathed in moonlight reflecting against the window pane. In that quiet darkness, a serene smile crossed her face. She whispered softly, as if speaking to her late husband, "Robert, I finally balanced the books of my life." The next afternoon, the phone rang nonstop. Evelyn lifted her eyes from her teacup and saw her daughter-in-law's name glowing on the screen, Haley. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello, Mother." Haley's voice came through calm on the surface, but threaded with unease. "Are you free tonight? I'd like to invite you over for dinner. We should talk about the future." Evelyn understood immediately. That gentle tone had never come from affection. It was the sound of a proposal, or more accurately, a demand wrapped in sweetness. She simply replied, "All right, I'll come." That evening, Liam's house was bright with lights. On the dining table, candles flickered and the smell of roasted beef filled the room, but the warmth of family that once lived there was gone. Haley sat at the head of the table, dressed in an ivory dress, her smile carefully rehearsed. Liam poured wine, pretending everything was normal. "Thank you for coming, Mother Haley," began her voice dripping with honey. "My store has been doing really well and there's an opportunity to expand next door. If you could sign as a guarantor, the bank would approve the loan quickly. It's just a formality." Evelyn set her glass down, her eyes fixed on her daughter-in-law. "How much do you need, Haley? 70,000. Haley replied casually, as if it were a small amount. "But you know that's not really the point. We're family, and I trust you understand that." A long silence followed. Liam glanced at his wife, then at his mother, his expression uncertain. "I think this is a great opportunity, Mom. Haley's worked really hard. All you have to do is sign and the store will reach a whole new level." Evelyn looked at her son. For a moment she saw the little boy who once held her hand on his first day of school, the boy who had promised, "I'll always protect you, Mom." But the man before her was no longer that child. He was someone who had allowed his mother's dignity to be traded for blind loyalty to his wife. Evelyn smiled faintly, her voice low and calm, but cold enough to chill the room. "No." The entire table froze. Liam spoke softly. "Mom, why refuse?" "Because I won't repeat my mistakes," Evelyn said. "I've helped you enough. From now on, I'll let everyone take care of their own lives." Haley let out a forced laugh, trying to hide her anger. "Are you scared? Or do you just not have enough money left?" Evelyn met her gaze steadily. "No, I just don't have enough trust left." No one spoke again. Liam stood still, his lips parting as if to say something, but no words came. Haley's smile hardened into a thin, cold line. She wasn't used to being refused, least of all by the woman she had always seen as weak. Evelyn pushed her chair back and stood adjusting her coat carefully. "Thank you for dinner, and good luck to you both." Her heels clicked evenly against the wooden floor as she walked toward the door. Outside, the Portland night was draped in fog, the chill slipping through every gap, yet her heart felt strangely warm. With every step, another burden seemed to lift. At the gate, she paused and looked back at the brightly lit house behind her, the place she had once called home, now nothing more than a shell filled with deceit. Through the window's yellow glow, she could still see Haley standing there, clutching her wine glass so tightly her knuckles turned white. Liam sat with his head bowed like a child caught doing wrong. Evelyn smiled softly, a calm smile free of resentment, carrying only closure. On the drive home, she thought of Maggie. She would call her friend in the morning. The papers in the drawer were no longer memories. They were weapons. This battle would need no shouting, no tears, only one seal, one signature, and the absolute power of silence. That cold, misty morning in Portland fog still clung to the trees outside the porch. Evelyn Carter sat at her desk, carefully opening the neatly stacked folders in her drawer. On the table, a cup of black coffee steamed gently, its bitter aroma blending into the still air. Everything in the room was in perfect order, everything except her heart, which rippled quietly beneath the calm. The papers before her were traces of years of silent sacrifice, transfer receipts, bank statements, investment contracts for Haley's loft and Lucas's tuition invoices. Each page marked a time she had saved her son and daughter-in-law from disaster, each number a piece of freedom she had lost. Evelyn turned the pages slowly until her eyes rested on one document dated 2019, the contract proving she had invested $60,000 and legally held majority ownership of the store. A faint smile appeared on her lips, one touched with both sadness and resolve. "Maybe it's time to reclaim what was always mine," she whispered almost to herself. Evelyn opened her laptop and typed a short email to Maggie Lynn. It contained only 3 words: "It's time." Less than 15 minutes later, the phone rang. Maggie's voice came through clearly. "I suppose that means you've made up your mind." "Yes." Evelyn replied, calm but certain. "I'm done being silent. Then meet me at the notary's office at 2 o'clock. Bring every document." That afternoon, under a silver-gray sky, Evelyn carried the carefully wrapped folder to meet Maggie. The office was small, filled with the warm scent of paper and ink, the light soft and golden. The notary, a gentle-voiced woman with graying hair, reviewed each document carefully before nodding. "Everything is valid," she said. "Under Oregon law, you have full legal right to restore your ownership. Once you sign here, Haley's Loft will officially belong to you." Evelyn took the pen. The tip touched the paper, her hand steady. The sound of the pen gliding across the page was quiet but decisive, like the click of a lock turning open inside her. When she finished, she looked up, meeting Maggie's steady gaze. There was no cheer, no tears, only the calm of someone stepping through an old door into new air. On the drive home, light rain began to fall, misting the car windows. Stopped at a red light, Evelyn watched people hurrying across the street and realized she no longer belonged to that rush. From now on, she wanted to move slowly, steadily, like the heartbeat of someone who had already survived the storm. As soon as she arrived home, the phone rang again. Haley's name flashed on the screen. Her voice was sharp and furious. "What are you doing, Mother? The bank just called?" "They said the ownership documents are being reviewed and it's all because of what you submitted." Evelyn closed her eyes and took a slow breath. "I didn't do anything, Haley. I only confirmed what you signed, the thing you've tried to forget. You can't do this. That store is my work." Evelyn's tone stayed even. "No, it's the work of both of us, but I'm the one who paid for it with my life." She ended the call and set the phone down. The house was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock. Evelyn's gaze drifted to the old photo of her late husband, Robert, the man who had once told her, "Don't let anyone make you forget who you are." She smiled faintly. Outside, the rain had stopped. Pale light spilled through the window, glowing on her soft silver hair. Evelyn stood, poured herself another cup of tea, and said softly, almost like a sigh, "No one can save you but yourself." And today, I finally did. A new chapter of her life had begun, not written in tears, but signed with one firm, graceful stroke by a woman once dismissed as weak, yet who had never truly been so. 2 days later, a series of urgent knocks pulled Evelyn out of her short afternoon nap. She opened the door and found a mail carrier holding a thick yellow envelope stamped with red letters that read, "Urgent Legal Documents." Evelyn thanked him and closed the door. On the envelope, the bold print read, "Haley Carter Civil Complaint." She wasn't surprised. In fact, in that moment, she felt an odd sense of calm. Evelyn placed the envelope on the table, brewed a pot of tea, and called Maggie. "She did exactly what I expected," she said. "Open it," Maggie replied. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. When her friend arrived, the 2 women sat together in the living room as the afternoon light streamed through the curtains in soft golden streaks. Evelyn carefully slit the envelope open and pulled out a thick stack of papers. Haley was accusing her of coercion under financial distress, demanding the 2019 contract be voided and full ownership of the store returned. Maggie skimmed through a few lines, then let out a quiet laugh. "She has no evidence. This is just an intimidation tactic." Evelyn nodded, though a faint sadness stirred inside her, not fear, but disappointment. That daughter-in-law, the one she had helped since she had nothing, was now willing to turn gratitude into resentment just to protect an illusion of power. Later that afternoon, Maggie made a few calls to her contacts in the court system. "The preliminary hearing could be scheduled for next week," she said. "Evelyn, you should be ready. But don't worry, I'll stand by you." Evelyn smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Maggie. I'm not afraid to face court anymore. I've stood before many who judged me before, but this time it's different. This isn't a fight to win, it's a fight to reclaim my dignity." That night, the house was so quiet, Evelyn could hear the clock ticking second by second. She opened her safe and took out the original files, reviewing every detail, the transfer receipts, purchase invoices, bank statements. Each page was a fragment of her past, undeniable proof of love, taken for granted. She organized the documents into neat sets and placed them carefully into a leather folder. Once everything was ready, she turned off the lights and sat by the window. Outside, a fine drizzle had begun to fall, scattering tiny reflections across the wet street. She closed her eyes and listened to the familiar sound, the sound of new beginnings. A single thought flickered in her mind. If this is the price of freedom, I am willing to pay it. The hearing day arrived sooner than she expected. That morning, Maggie drove Evelyn to the county courthouse. The building, made of old stone, stood solemn and tall, its grand columns rising through the morning mist. The hallway inside was quiet, except for the sharp click of Haley's high heels. She wore a black suit, her makeup immaculate, her eyes briefly flicking toward her mother-in-law before turning away as if to a stranger. Evelyn sat on the wooden bench, her hand gripping the folder tightly. Maggie placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Take a deep breath. This is just procedure. She'll soon learn that the law doesn't protect lies." When the judge entered, the courtroom fell silent. Haley's lawyer began speaking quickly, his voice sharp, trying to paint the elderly mother as a manipulator. Evelyn listened without reacting. She knew that the truth didn't need to be shouted. Then it was Maggie's turn. She rose slowly, her voice calm but resolute. "Your Honor, my client is not just a mother, but an investor who saved her daughter-in-law's business from bankruptcy. Every transfer of funds is documented. The contract is notarized and valid. There is no evidence of coercion, only kindness that was exploited." Maggie presented printed documents, signatures, seals, and dates, everything clear and undeniable. The judge, a middle-aged woman with weary but fair eyes, reviewed the file and spoke briefly. "Mrs. Carter's evidence is fully valid. The complaint is dismissed." The gavel struck, and the room fell into silence. Haley stood frozen, her usual confidence gone. She turned toward Liam, who sat at the back of the room, but he only looked down, avoiding her eyes. Evelyn exhaled slowly and smiled. There was no thrill of victory, only a deep sense of relief. Her battle had ended with a few sheets of paper, simple but final, the same way she had chosen to step out of the long shadow of her past. As they left the courthouse, the cold wind swept through the rows of trees, tossing her silver hair into the air. Maggie looked at her friend and smiled gently. "See, I told you. Your silence is stronger than any argument." Evelyn nodded, and this time it's the last word. 2 days after the trial, Portland returned to its usual rhythm, but inside Evelyn Carter, everything had changed. She was no longer the mother who bowed to unreasonable demands, no longer the keeper of a wallet that funded someone else's illusion of happiness. Sitting by the window, the afternoon light caught her silver hair as her worn hands turned the final pages of the now complete file, each page a quiet declaration that said, "I will not be erased again." That afternoon, a knock echoed at the door. It was Liam. Her son stood on the porch, shoulders, heavy eyes tired. "Mom," he said softly, "can I come in?" Evelyn nodded and quietly poured tea. Steam rose between them, a thin veil separating mother and son. Liam sat down silent for a long time before sighing. "Haley's furious. She says you ruined everything." Evelyn's voice was calm. "No, I simply stopped saving what was never worth saving." Liam lowered his head, his fingers twisting together. "I know you've helped us so much, but I don't understand why you had to take it to court. You know, I hate things like this." Evelyn looked straight into his eyes. "Because I became invisible in my own family. I helped, I paid debts, I took the blame, and in the end, you sat silently while your wife humiliated me in front of my grandson. If I had done nothing, then my son, the whole world, would believe I really was useless." Liam opened his mouth, but no words came. He remembered that night Haley's arrogance and his own silence. Now, seeing his mother's steady gaze, he realized that silence had been the deepest wound she ever carried. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You have every right to do what you did. I just don't know how to start over." Evelyn smiled, gentle but sad. "Start by relearning how to respect others, especially yourself." When Liam left, the afternoon light had begun to fade. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Evelyn alone in the quiet room. She stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the cold air. Far away, the sun sank behind the trees, its last red glow painting the clouds. She whispered to herself, "You'll understand someday, Liam, just not today." That night, Evelyn opened an old notebook. Among the columns of dry numbers, she added a few new lines. Every dollar once represented love, but love needs boundaries. When kindness becomes obligation, it ceases to be love and turns into a chain. The next morning, Maggie arrived with an envelope. "The bank finished the process," she said. "You are now the legal owner of Haley's Loft." Evelyn opened it and saw her name printed boldly across the document. She didn't feel joy, only a strange calm, like placing the final brick in a wall that finally stood complete. "What will you do now?" Maggie asked. Evelyn smiled and set the paper aside. "I won't shut down her store. I just want her to understand that respect can't be bought with money or taken through threats." "You're too generous," Maggie said, half admiring, half concerned. "But don't forget, people like Haley don't stop easily. She'll try something else." Evelyn nodded. "I know, but this time I won't run. I spent my life keeping the peace so much that I forgot what fairness meant. Now I just want to live honestly for myself and for the silence I've chosen." That afternoon, Evelyn stopped by the boutique. The store was still open, but no longer bustling. The staff stood quietly and customers were few. Haley stood behind the counter. When she saw Evelyn, her eyes flashed with hatred. "Did you come to watch me fall?" Evelyn smiled softly. "No, Haley. I came to remind you that no one can build a castle with someone else's money and expect it to stand forever." Haley clenched her fists but said nothing. Evelyn turned and walked away, leaving behind the heavy scent of perfume and the suffocating air of defeat. On the way home, the cold wind swept through the streets, carrying the faint scent of early rain. A lightness filled Evelyn's chest. This battle was no longer about winning or losing. It was about ending the days when she had to ask permission just to live in peace. When she returned home, she opened the door and looked around her small, quiet house, now free of burdens. She turned on the lamp and placed a vase of fresh lavender on the table. The light reflected on the wall, revealing the image of a silver-haired woman with clear, steady eyes, no longer a forgotten mother, but someone who had reclaimed her life. She spoke softly, her voice like a whisper in the breeze. "Sometimes victory isn't about making others fall. It's about standing up without needing anyone to lift you." That morning, Portland was bathed in a soft golden light, the kind that glowed like honey. Dew still clung to the leaves, and the air carried the crisp chill of early autumn. Evelyn Carter opened her window, letting the cool breeze flow in, bringing with it the scent of grass and a faint trace of lavender from the small garden outside her porch. Her life, which once seemed to have ended in years of endurance, was now opening into an entirely new chapter, peaceful, simple, and deeply her own. She poured a cup of coffee, sat at the table, and unfolded the morning newspaper that had just arrived. The headline on the business page caught her eye: Haley's Loft temporarily closes for financial restructuring. Below it was a photo of Haley in a white suit, standing in front of the empty storefront, her expression weary. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment, feeling no satisfaction, only a quiet, wistful sadness, not for Haley's failure, but for the inevitability of consequences born from her own choices. Maggie Lynn arrived at noon carrying a bag of freshly baked bread. "I suppose you've read the paper," she said, sitting down with a knowing look. "I told you, an empire built on someone else's money never stands for long." Evelyn nodded gently, her eyes fixed on the window. "I don't want to see her suffer, Maggie. I just want her to learn something about gratitude and about the limits of greed." Maggie smiled sadly. "You're still as kind as ever. But maybe that kindness is what makes you strong. You won Evelyn, but you didn't have to step on anyone to do it." That afternoon, the sky cleared and sunlight filtered softly through layers of gray cloud. Evelyn put on her coat and walked to the central library where for the past 2 months she had been volunteering to teach a class called Financial Management for Women in Midlife. When she arrived, Nora the librarian greeted her with a warm smile. "Ms. Carter, you won't believe it, the class is full again today. We even have 10 new sign-ups." Evelyn laughed, her voice calm and low. "I only teach them what I wish I had known sooner." The small classroom on the second floor was filled with light. Every seat was taken. Some women had gray in their hair. Others were barely past 30, but they all carried the same look in their eyes: uncertainty. Evelyn stepped to the front, her gaze gentle but firm. "I'm not here to teach you how to get rich," she began. "I'm here to tell you that every dollar you earn carries your own worth. And if you don't respect it, someone else will decide its value for you." The room fell silent. Evelyn shared her story, not naming Haley, not mentioning lawsuits or betrayal, but through simple metaphors about a woman who once believed love meant endless sacrifice and who had to learn the power of saying no. We are taught that motherhood means giving everything, she said slowly. But no one teaches us that giving until we lose ourselves is another kind of loss. It took me nearly 60 years to understand that. A young woman in the front row quietly wiped her tears. Another, older and world-weary, nodded with wet eyes. Evelyn stepped down and placed a hand on their shoulders. "It's never too late to start again," she said softly. "You only need to believe that you deserve to." When the session ended, many women stayed behind to thank her. One handed Evelyn a small note. On it was written, "I thought my life was over, but you made me believe I still have worth." Evelyn read it, emotion swelling in her chest. She realized that healing doesn't always come from victory. It comes from helping others find their own light. As she was leaving, Nora caught up to her. "Ms. Carter, have you ever thought about writing your lessons down? I'd like to publish them on the library's site. Your story could help hundreds of women." Evelyn smiled. "If even one of them finds the courage to change, that's enough." On her way home, the afternoon sun stretched across the boulevard, glinting off the red brick buildings. She stopped by a small cafe called Harbor Brew, the same place she had visited months ago when she first began her journey toward freedom. This time, her black coffee no longer tasted bitter, perhaps because the bitterness inside her was gone. Sitting quietly in the corner, Evelyn pulled out her notebook and wrote, "They once made me believe my worth depended on how much others needed me. Now I know true value lies in daring to live without anyone's permission. When she stepped back into the street, the wind carried the scent of coffee and lavender from a nearby garden. Evelyn lifted her face toward the sunlight. She had lived through years of being dismissed, used, and ridiculed, and now every step she took carried a quiet kind of pride. That evening back home, she brewed tea and opened her window to the night breeze. Outside, Portland was still alive and noisy, but inside her little house, there was only peace. She looked out at the lavender in full bloom and smiled. Life didn't always need grand victories. Sometimes it was enough to have a calm afternoon, a cup of tea, and the comfort of knowing she had lived true to herself. Evelyn whispered softly, her voice like a breath. People can take your money, your reputation, even your trust, but no one can take your dignity unless you hand it to them. And that night, under the city's bright lights, the silver-haired woman sat quietly, her presence calm, yet full of strength, a symbol of victory without noise, a small but steadfast flame burning quietly in the dark. 3 weeks later, Portland welcomed the first rains of the season, soft and steady, like the quiet knocking of the past. Evelyn Carter sat in her living room holding a cup of hot tea, watching raindrops collect on the window pane. She'd grown accustomed to her new life mornings spent at the library teaching financial literacy afternoons, tending her flowers and painting. It was a simple life, but more meaningful than all the years she had lived in the shadow of false gratitude. That afternoon, as she was wiping down the table, the doorbell rang. Maggie Lynn stood there, her raincoat soaked through. "Evelyn," she said, her voice low, "I just heard something. You should brace yourself." "What is it?" Evelyn asked, inviting her in. "Haley is about to lose the store completely. She hasn't paid her taxes and has no cash left. But instead of accepting it, she's trying to blame you. I heard she's been telling people you scammed her and stole her business." Evelyn was silent for a moment, listening to the rain drumming softly on the roof. "I'm not surprised. People who live on lies can't bear the weight of truth." Maggie sighed. "I know you don't care about your reputation, but I worry she might do something foolish. She's cornered." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I don't want her to suffer, Maggie. I just want her to stop stepping on others to stay tall." "You're too kind," Maggie said, pouring tea. "But maybe that's what makes you different." When Maggie left the house, sank back into stillness. Evelyn went to her desk and opened a drawer, taking out a white envelope, the official transfer contract confirming her ownership of the boutique. She stared at it for a long moment, then put it away. She had no desire for revenge. She just wanted it to be over. But life, as always, rarely grants peace when others have yet to learn their lesson. 2 nights later, as she was rinsing her teacup, loud knocks echoed through the house. Evelyn opened the door to find Haley standing there, not the polished woman in elegant dresses, but disheveled pale, her coat drenched from the rain. "We need to talk," Haley said, her voice hoarse from the cold. "Come in," Evelyn replied calmly. Haley stepped inside, her wet shoes leaving dark marks on the wooden floor. "You have to give the store back to me," she blurted out immediately. "I know you won in court, but I can't lose everything. I have a family, employees you don't understand." Evelyn sat down and poured tea for both of them. "I understand more than you think, but I didn't take anything from you, Haley. I only reclaimed what was already mine. You want money, don't you?" Haley shouted, her voice cracking. "I can pay you back. I just need time." Evelyn shook her head slowly. "I don't want money. I want respect, something you never cared to offer." Haley laughed bitterly. "Respect? Don't fool yourself. I built that store." "No, Haley," Evelyn said firmly, her voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You built it with effort. Yes, but I bought every brick that holds it up. You thought you were the owner, but without me, that store would have collapsed 5 years ago." Haley clenched her fists, tears spilling down her cheeks, a mix of rage and despair. "You've won." Are you happy now? Evelyn looked at the woman before her, the same woman who had once driven her from her own dinner table in humiliation. But now, Haley was just a broken shadow of the person she had tried to be. No, Haley. I'm not happy, Evelyn said softly. I'm sad because you had every chance to be a good person, but you chose the shorter path, the path of arrogance. Haley broke down, burying her face in her hands. Evelyn sat quietly, offering neither comfort nor satisfaction. She knew that sometimes people only learn when they finally hit rock bottom. After a while, Haley lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. I don't know what to do anymore, she said, her voice trembling. I've lost everything. You still have your family, Evelyn replied. If you have the courage to apologize and start over, then you haven't lost it all. Haley was silent, then stood up. I'm not going to apologize, she said softly, but thank you for listening. The door closed behind her, leaving the house in silence once again. Evelyn sat for a long time, watching the rain drip from the eaves in slow, steady lines. She didn't know where Haley would go, but she knew that something inside the younger woman had finally cracked, and that was the beginning of awakening. Later that night, Liam called. Mom, Haley just got home. You spoke with her, didn't you? Yes, Evelyn replied. She cried, he said quietly. For the first time in years, I think she really cried. Evelyn was silent for a moment. Maybe in the end, everyone has to face themselves, my son. She hung up and turned off the lights. The house slipped into darkness, only the moonlight reflected across the window pane. She didn't need to win anymore. Everything she needed she had already found in stillness, in the quiet strength of letting go. Outside, the rain had stopped. The wind brushed gently against the lavender by the porch. Evelyn stood and closed the window, whispering into the night. True peace isn't when others stop hurting you. It's when you stop letting them. On a bright April morning, Portland glowed under the first clear sunlight after days of rain. Evelyn Carter opened the window, letting the cool air rush in, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and coffee from the little cafe across the street. In her hand was an invitation from the library, celebrating 3 months of the Women's Financial Skills Program, honoring our founder, Ms. Evelyn Carter. She read it again and again, still unable to believe that she, the woman once called useless, was now being invited to stand on stage as an inspiration to others. That afternoon, Maggie stopped by. You're going to give a speech, aren't you? Evelyn smiled, her hands busy arranging flowers. I think I'll just say a few words. I'm not one for the spotlight. You're one for the truth, Maggie replied, and now it's time to tell it. When the ceremony began, the small library hall was packed. Dozens of women who had attended her classes filled the seats, their faces bright, their eyes full of trust. Nora, the library manager, spoke into the microphone. Today we honor Ms. Evelyn, the woman who reminded us that a woman's strength never disappears. It only needs to be awakened. Applause filled the room. Evelyn stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze calm. She looked out at the crowd and began softly. There was a time when I thought my only purpose was to help others, until I realized kindness loses its value when it makes you disappear. I stand here not to talk about pain, but to share how I learned to add, again, not in money, but in self-worth. The room grew completely silent. Evelyn continued, I was once belittled by those I loved, but I've learned that sometimes silence is the strongest answer. Forgiveness doesn't always need words, and victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just finding the courage to live peacefully after everything. A young woman in the back row began to cry. Evelyn paused, smiling gently. If any of you have ever been called useless, please remember this. Every mother, Every wife, every woman carries a value that no one else can measure. We don't need recognition to have meaning. We just need to believe that we are still strong enough to start again. When she stepped down, applause rose again, longer this time, as several women stood to embrace her. Nora handed Evelyn a bouquet of purple lavender. "Thank you for making me believe I can change," she said, her eyes shining. Evelyn smiled, breathing in the gentle scent. It was the same calm fragrance she once dreamed of in that lakeside cabin so many years ago. That night back home, the phone rang. It was Liam. She hesitated for a moment, then answered. Her son's voice was low and tired. "Mom, the store, it's closed for good. Haley's looking for a new job. I just wanted you to know she apologized. She said she won't bother you anymore." Evelyn was quiet for a while. "Are you all right, Liam? I am Mom. I'm putting my life back together. Lucas and I are moving closer to his school. I just want you to know I'm grateful for you." When the call ended, Evelyn sat for a long time in the stillness of her home. Her son's thank you was like a long, delayed note of music, soft but pure, closing the dark chapter of her past. She looked out the window. The moon was still bright. On the table, the lavender bouquet released its delicate scent, like a reminder that beauty always blooms after we dare to let go. The next morning, she went into the garden, turning the soil to plant a few new rows of flowers. She hummed as she worked a habit she hadn't had in years. The voice of a 70-year-old woman blended with the bird song, clear and tender, like the first morning of spring. At the corner of the garden, Maggie watched with a gentle smile. "You've really found yourself again, Evelyn." Evelyn looked up, squinting in the sunlight. "No, Maggie," she said softly, her voice light as the breeze. "I didn't find anything. I just stopped searching." The wind carried the scent of lavender across the garden, and in that quiet moment, Evelyn Carter knew that her life, after so many years, had finally settled into its rightful place, peaceful, strong, and belonging only to herself. On a late summer afternoon, Portland was bathed in a soft golden glow, sunlight spilling across the Willamette River like 1,000 shards of broken glass. On her porch, Evelyn Carter watered the blooming lavender, its gentle fragrance drifting through the air, carrying memories of a time when her heart had never known pain. Her life after the storm had slowly found balance again. Every morning she taught financial literacy at the library every afternoon. She came home to brew tea and write her story in an old leather notebook. She had learned how to live slowly, to cherish each breath, each new sunrise. That afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, the doorbell rang. Evelyn opened the door to find Liam, her son, standing there, his face tired but kind. Beside him was 10-year-old Lucas, clutching a small bouquet of flowers. "Hi, Grandma," the boy exclaimed. "Dad and I came to visit you." Evelyn laughed, her eyes misting. "Oh my, you two really surprised me. Come in, the tea's still warm." The three sat around the table. Lucas placed the bouquet down a mix of white daisies and lavender tied with a blue ribbon. "I picked them from the school garden, Grandma." "Do you like them?" "I love them," Evelyn said softly, touching a petal. "You know, daisies are the flowers of patience. Maybe that's why I love them." The air grew warmer, but a quiet distance lingered between mother and son. Liam held his teacup, turning it slowly in his hands. His voice lowered. "Mom, I owe you an apology. I don't even know where to start." Evelyn said nothing, her eyes gentle. Liam continued. "After everything ended, I realized you never cared about money or power. You just wanted to be heard. And I didn't listen. I didn't protect you." Evelyn placed her hand over his. "Liam, I'm not angry anymore. Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't Haley's cruelty. It was your silence. But today, hearing you say this, I feel heard again." Liam bowed his head, his voice trembling. "Mom Haley's left Portland. She took a job in Seattle. Lucas and I are staying here. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to live differently. I don't want Lucas to grow up thinking silence is normal." Evelyn smiled, her tone soft as a breeze. "No one can change the past, son, but we can choose how to live what's left. And I believe you will." Lucas, who had been playing with his toy car, looked up and asked innocently, "Grandma, Dad says you're the strongest person in the world. Is that true?" Evelyn laughed, brushing his hair. "No, sweetheart. I was just someone who used to be afraid, but then I learned not to let fear control me." The boy tilted his head, thinking, then smiled. That's what being strong means. The afternoon passed peacefully. When father and son stood to leave, Liam turned back and looked at his mother for a long time. "Mom, thank you for never giving up on me, even after all my silence." Evelyn replied softly, "You're my son. I can be angry, but I could never abandon you." When the door closed behind them, Evelyn stood on the porch, watching their figures disappear down the quiet road. Her heart felt light. Between gratitude and old sorrow, there was only deep peace. A few days later, Nora, the library director, invited Evelyn to speak at an event titled "Women and Independence." "You're the perfect person for this." Nora said, her eyes bright. "Your story has inspired so many." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. The talk took place in a small room, but every seat was filled. More than 50 people, mostly middle-aged women, had come to listen. When Evelyn stepped onto the stage, the light glimmered on her silver hair like a faint halo. She carried no notes, speaking straight from her heart. "I used to be the woman who believed kindness could fix everything she began. I paid debts, took the blame, stayed silent to keep the peace. Until one day I realized kindness can't save anyone if it destroys you in the process." The room was still the only sound, the quiet scratching of pens. Evelyn spoke about finding her voice again, from the humiliating dinner table to the courtroom to the classroom she now taught in. "There was a time I thought I was too old to start over," she said. "But age isn't a chain. It's a reminder that we've lived long enough to know our true worth. When someone calls you useless, don't argue. Prove them wrong with your life." A woman in the front row began to cry. Another stood up, taking Evelyn's hand. "Thank you, Evelyn. I'm trapped in a painful marriage, but because of you, I believe I can leave." Evelyn squeezed her hand, her smile kind. "Don't run from fear, my dear. Walk through it. Freedom isn't a place you go. It's the moment you decide to leave." When the talk ended, the audience rose to their feet, applauding for a long time. Maggie stood in the corner, eyes red. As they walked to the car, she said, "Evelyn, you made them cry, but not out of sadness. They cried because they saw themselves in you." Evelyn smiled, gazing at the golden sunset along the road ahead. Sometimes telling your wounds isn't to reopen them, but to remind someone they're not alone. That night back home, she opened her leather notebook and wrote a new line beneath the unfinished page. "I once thought I could only save others with money, but the most valuable thing I ever had was my own experience. And by sharing it, I save myself." Outside, the wind brushed through the lavender garden, carrying the scent of a new season. Evelyn stopped writing, closed her notebook, her eyes glowing softly under the lamp. Inside her, there was no emptiness, only fullness, the quiet strength of a woman who had walked through pain and finally arrived at true freedom. That early autumn morning, Portland wore a thin golden veil. Gentle sunlight filtered through the trees, falling onto the small garden outside Evelyn Carter's porch, where lavender buds were just beginning to bloom. There were no more restless nights, no more midnight phone calls, only peace, simplicity, and the sweet song of sparrows outside her window, a melody she had forgotten she once loved so deeply. Evelyn brewed a pot of tea, brought it to the porch, and opened the thick notebook she had been writing in for months. Each page was a fragment of her life, years of patience, moments of humiliation, and the long journey of standing up and learning to live for herself. Today she planned to write the final page, but before she picked up her pen, Maggie Lynn arrived holding a large envelope and a bright smile. From Nora at the library, she said, "She wanted you to know your speech has been published on the city's website. People are calling you the Quiet Flame." Evelyn laughed softly, her eyes glowing with quiet joy. It's a beautiful name. Maybe it's true flames don't need to roar to shine, only to burn steadily. Maggie sat down and poured tea. "You know your class has inspired 3 women to open their own shops and 2 others to go back to school. They say you're the one who lit their flame." Evelyn said nothing, her heart warm. There was no bitterness left in her, only gratitude that her pain had somehow turned into light for others. That afternoon the phone rang. Liam's voice sounded lighter than it had in years. "Mom, Lucas and I want to invite you to dinner. I want to cook your favorite meal." Evelyn smiled. "Then I suppose I can't say no." That evening, when she stepped into her son's kitchen, the air was filled with the scent of food and laughter. Lucas ran up to hug her proudly, showing her a new drawing, a silver-haired woman standing in a lavender garden with a bright house behind her. "That's you, Grandma," he said proudly. "My teacher told us to draw our hero." Evelyn hugged him gently, her eyes glistening. "I'm not a hero, Lucas. I'm just someone who learned not to be afraid anymore." "That's what heroes are," the boy said, and both Evelyn and Liam laughed. Dinner was simple spaghetti salad and warm waffles, but to Evelyn, it was the most comforting meal she'd had in years. There were no cruel remarks, no cold silence, only the clinking of cutlery and her son's sincere gaze. After dinner, Liam poured tea and looked at her. "Mom, thank you for not giving up on me even when I stayed silent for so long." Evelyn replied softly, "There was a time I thought I'd lost you, but sometimes to find the most precious things we have to let them lose their way for a while." Driving home that night, she passed through quiet streets lit by long ribbons of lamplight. The autumn wind slipped through the car window, carrying the faint scent of dry leaves. She didn't feel lonely. Instead, she felt as though she had finally returned to herself, the woman who had been broken, yet chose kindness as her final answer. When she arrived home, she opened the door and turned on her old radio. The deep, familiar voice of Louis Armstrong filled the room, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Evelyn sat down, closed her eyes, and let the music wash over her. Outside, the wind stirred gently, bending the lavender stems. She stood and opened the window, letting the breeze lift her silver hair. In that moment, she could almost hear Robert's voice, her late husband, whisper, "You did it, Evelyn." She smiled softly. On her desk, the notebook lay open. She picked up her pen and wrote the final words I was once called useless. But from that, I learned that my worth was never in how others saw me, but in how I chose to rise. I didn't seek revenge. I simply stopped letting others define my life, and in silence, I won. She closed the notebook and placed it beside a vase of lavender. Moonlight streamed through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. Evelyn inhaled deeply, the familiar fragrance filling her lungs, her heart brimming with peace. Her life, after all its storms, had finally come to rest in calm waters, no longer needing to prove anything, only to live truly. Her voice rose gently into the night. "If anyone ever makes you forget your worth, don't be angry. Thank them because they taught you how to find yourself again. Real strength doesn't come from shouting, but from walking forward steadily in silence. She sat still, listening to the wind, the radio, and the slow rhythm of her own heartbeat. Everything felt complete, nothing missing, nothing excess, a life broken, mended, and whole again. Before going to bed, she added one last line beneath the final page. If my story helped you realize you can stand again, tell yours. 'Cause sometimes one quiet voice can change an entire life. Evelyn turned off the light and the house sank into moonlight. Outside, the lavender continued to bloom, and in that tranquil night the quiet flame kept glowing, not to be seen, but to light the path for those still finding their way home.